I'm not the first YouTuber to point out that in recent times there has been a significant drop in the reading level of modern audiences, particularly in the Anglosphere. Not only has it become far less accessible to attend post-secondary education in the past 20 years, being an educated person is often met with scorn from peers and the general population. There is much to be said about the tension between capitalism and academia, and it's something I've actually spoken about in the past in one of my live streams. Academia, to many individuals, is thought of as a wealthy elitist club rather than a complicated network of people from all walks of life that value information, knowledge, and critical thinking in order to make sense of the world around us. How this has gone on to affect reading level and, by extension, art and fiction within the modern media landscape cannot be understated. In a world where people woefully misinterpret simple stories made for children about being yourself, trying to do the right thing even when it's hard, and learning to love and forgive each other, it feels like darker fiction made for adult audiences meant to shine a light on the human condition and lay bare the ugly side of ourselves so that we can better understand who we are, don't even have a chance. If audiences cannot suspend their disbelief to accept, for example, that a show about living space rocks that come to Earth and become part of a blended family doesn't have a precise one-to-one comparison to experiences in real life, and that much of what is shown in cartoons like this are metaphors and analogies, how can we expect them to have an understanding of something bigger, darker, and more cutting? And how can that affect the way we interact with the real world? Let's dig into that, starting with some ground rules establishing just what we're going to be talking about. The crux of this video hinges on establishing the difference between verisimilitude and realism. Where verisimilitude is a working, believable frame of internal logic that is consistent within the universe of a fictional world, realism adheres strictly to the expectations, logic, and moral framework aligned with the real world. To achieve successful verisimilitude, there are 4 things to consider. 1. Internal consistency. Early on, an internal set of rules and logic should be established and then later reinforced throughout the rest of the story. Internal consistency is imperative to maintain the audience's suspension of disbelief. It does not necessarily have to follow the same rules as the real world. Breaking this consistency in both the text and metatext surrounding a work of fiction will lead to a poor interpretation of said text. 2 is audience expectations. Different genres of media will generally adhere to certain tropes and levels of realism. A high fantasy adult novel will have a different set of expectations to a grounded sitcom for general audiences or a fairy tale story for young children. Comparative analysis and a better understanding of related text and the context in which a story is being written often play a large role in how we come to interpret stories. 3 is character behavior. Characters act in a way that is consistent with the rules of the world. Behavior of a character in a work of fiction may not make sense if translated directly to reality. For example, not believing in deities in the world of Dungeons & Dragons Forgotten Realms doesn't have a logical basis in the same way as not believing in deities in our own world, because deities objectively, provably exist in the Forgotten Realms and are heavily involved in the geopolitical landscape of the setting. It could easily be encountered by the characters. Someone who would be considered reasonably skeptical and pragmatic in our world for a lack of belief might be considered delusional and even a conspiracy theorist within the world of the Forgotten Realms. 4 is world building. World building can make a setting feel more real. Detailing an immersive world allows us to believe that it could exist. While it is a balancing act, giving the audience enough information that they can imagine what it would be like to fill a role in your world and project their own experiences and feelings onto it, and how they might behave as a denizen of a piece of fiction, makes the world feel real, even if it contains elements of the fantastic. These are all guidelines, of course, and a talented writer that knows what they're doing can play with these rules to create a profound and rich narrative. However, having a good understanding of how all of this works is crucial, whether you decide to follow these guidelines or intentionally go against them. Shelving an expectation of realism when analyzing a work of fiction is often very important for understanding the text. Even shows that appear realistic from the outset are better understood through the lens of verisimilitude. A good example of this is crime dramas. Shows like CSI, NCIS, Bones, and Dexter try to frame themselves in a more realistic light. They use elevated forms of technology and depict cops as scrappy underdogs. Getting bogged down by this expectation of realism can feed into propaganda and give a false impression about how law enforcement in the real world looks like. It can also be extremely exhausting in the inverse when anything and everything that someone has to say about a crime drama or medical drama is, they wouldn't be able to do this in real life. That's not how a real hospital works. The jargon they're saying is completely meaningless. On the other end of things, if you're watching a cartoon show where good guys beat up bad guys and sometimes verbal fights between friends bleed out into physical ones, accepting that throwing fists is part of the norm of the show we're watching is part of the contract we as viewers sign up for when reading a text. If your analysis of a slapstick cartoon show is that the protagonists are physically abusing one another, you're going to get a bad read of it. Different media requires different lenses. Often, people treat rather simplistic things intended for younger audiences with deathly seriousness and interpret a world of meaning and gravity that was never meant to be there in the first place. There is, however, plenty of media where the level of thought is truer to the text, or at least more amply provides the depth people wish to see in it. Nowhere is this conversation stronger in both what people have to say and how fiercely they argue with one another when it comes to dark fiction and how we expect, just because something is aimed at mature audiences, that it will be realistic. So when it comes to dark fiction, when we want to talk about things like abuse, addiction, and trauma, subjects that are often more appropriate for mature audiences, you can tell it in a very straightforward way. I'd say there's nothing wrong with that. However, the way these things make us feel can often be more profound than what a realistic piece of fiction can capture. In some cases, it can even feel tasteless or like some cheesy after-school special. Pain is a deeply personal and enigmatic experience. At our lowest points, it can feel like there is a layer of plexiglass between us and the rest of the world. Art that captures that lived experience is often heightened, relying on imagery and metaphor to relay its message. Expecting these depictions to be one-to-one with real life, or judging the actions of the characters as if they are actors in the real world, is doing these stories and the breadth of the human experience a disservice. One of the strongest and most profound episodes of the show Bojack Horseman is the penultimate episode. Season 6, Episode 15, The View from Halfway Down. Bojack Horseman is a show that, despite featuring anthropomorphic characters, is usually quite grounded in reality. And even though the main cast are characters all directly or tangentially related to Hollywood, the characters are all very relatable, especially and most painfully the star of the show, Bojack Horseman himself. In the previous episode, Bojack's world comes crashing down around him, and we soon find out that he threw himself into the bottom of a pool. While realistic depiction of his experience leading up to that point and the questions he was asking himself while in the bottom of that pool could have communicated his regrets in the proximity of his death, the writers instead chose to do something different. His mother, Beatrice Horseman, is hosting a dinner party, and all the guests are dead people whose deaths weigh on Bojack's conscience. Death is depicted as a black void, liquid and oily, that benignly drips from the ceiling at first, but as the episode goes on, takes a more active role. The characters ponder over the meaning of life, over what true goodness is. Is it better to make one person happy or leave a legacy that will last generations after you're gone? Some meet the void willingly and at peace. Some struggle and resist until the very end. For some it's quick, and for others their performance lingers. Yet the void comes for all, and eventually it threatens to swallow Bojack. In the next episode, we find that he survives his near-death experience. We're dragged back to reality as he faces the consequences of what he's done, but he lives, and he must suffer the consequences of his actions. It is, however, the view from halfway down, the second to last episode, that feels as if the entire series was building up to it, and leaves the emotional gut punch. In a way, I don't think Bojack Horseman would have been nearly as influential as it is if it wasn't for the view from halfway down and what it was trying to say about regret and life and death. These are the sort of profound messages that are best captured in more abstract, elevated experiences. Bojack's complexity as a character is widely agreed upon, with the show being famous for its nuanced take on deep and morally gray personalities, similar to works such as Breaking Bad. Other works are not always interrogated to the same extent, even when they may have similar complexity lying underneath the surface. If one goes into them willing to look beyond mere villainy of a villain protagonist and ask what is actually being communicated by the creator. Dexter is a live-action police procedural that began airing in 2006 based on the book series Darkly Dreaming Dexter by Jeff Lindsay. It follows our protagonist, Dexter Morgan, who is a blood splatter analyst.
Blood spatter
analyst, working for the Homicide Division of the Miami Metro Police Department. However, Dexter has a secret. After experiencing a traumatic event in his childhood, Dexter became morbidly fascinated with death and has gone on to become a serial killer that targets criminals that escape the American justice system. Aside from the books and the original run of the TV series that ran until 2013, there have been 3 spin-offs of the series, with the subtitles New Blood, Original Sin, and Resurrection. Of all of the TV series, the original 2006 run is the best, more specifically the first 4 seasons. I did enjoy Original Sin, and I'm happy to hear that it will continue releasing alongside Resurrection, but I don't care for New Blood, and I feel like Resurrection is going in a really strange direction. I think the bright, sunny setting of Miami, as well as the characters and themes of family and legacy, are what make the original show so appealing. The juxtaposition of Dexter's murderous tendencies with the bright sun of Florida reflect the welcoming and friendly side of Miami with its seedy underbelly. Despite being a popular tourist destination, violent crime statistics put Miami and the surrounding area in the top 88th percentile of all US cities, with rates even worse during the time of Dexter airing. Now, it's imperative that I point out that the television show is decidedly different from the books. In the books, Dexter's urge to kill comes from an actual demon that is possessing him, and ends up getting exorcised at the end of the series, leaving Dexter clean and innocent. And while I am making my way through it, I just don't really like Jeff Lindsay's narrative voice. I might do an analysis of the show versus the book later, but we're not here to talk about that. What I would like to focus on is the conversation being had in Dexter of what exactly made him this way. Is he capable of doing good? Are the actions we perceive as good tainted by the fact that he does bad things, and so, because he is bad, everything he does is bad? The show seems to go back and forth on this, but for the first few seasons, we get a gray, unfocused blur that it could go either way. When Dexter was young, he saw his mother killed in front of him, torn to pieces with a chainsaw, and then trapped in a shipping container with her body for days. Clearly, this event severely affected Dexter's psyche. It's possible that Dexter could have healed from his trauma if he wasn't immediately adopted by a cop. Cops work for a system that sees crime as an issue that can only be solved with justice, and usually that means the prison system. In Florida, this also means that the death penalty is on the table. Regardless of if it's by Dexter's hands or by the hands of the criminal justice system, certain actions lead to deserving death in the eyes of Dexter's adoptive father, Harry Morgan. If he went to therapy as a child, it's entirely possible that Dexter would have healed from his trauma. If he was placed in a home that told him he was capable of love and having a family, perhaps that's all Dexter would have been, if the light within him was nurtured rather than the darkness. On the other hand, this is in constant tension with the idea that Dexter is inherently broken and a monster, and his urge to kill must be fed somehow. The only way to justify it is to point him in the direction of someone who deserves it. Dexter is evil, but he's necessary evil.
Just like me. Empty inside.
The dichotomy of Dexter Morgan is what makes him such an interesting character. Dexter is shown to be protective and puts the effort into being compassionate to the people around him, even if he doesn't understand why they behave the way they do. He's good with kids and empathetic towards victims of violence and abuse. He's a genuine love for his family, doing what he can to shield them from the painful parts of himself, and letting people in even when it puts him in danger. He almost always avoids acting impulsively and in a way that could directly impact his friends and family, despite pursuing his dark interests. He is also a serial killer. More than that, being a serial killer is spoken of like an addiction throughout the show, or even a manifestation of trauma. In contemporary terms, perhaps even neurodivergence. Dexter struggles with empathy, and he needs to be in control. He has issues with anger, he can be vindictive and manipulative. Contrasting with his moments of compassion, Dexter can also be very inconsiderate, mostly stemming from his presumptuous and sometimes arrogant nature. In conversation, Dexter is quick to mock, belittle, and minimize others. He also makes decisions that lead to the darkness he compartmentalized into a neat little box leak out into the rest of his life. This ends up causing pain and death to the people around him. With all that in mind, what is Dexter trying to tell us? What is the story? Why, of all characters, is the narrator Dexter the serial killer and not someone like his sister Deborah? The obvious answer being that Dexter is the character we are supposed to empathize with. But hold on, this isn't a show that is made for serial killers. Most people aren't serial killers, and a show made exclusively for them isn't really going to have a big enough audience to be profitable. So it's probably not actually about whether it's okay for a serial killer to kill as long as his victims are bad guys. So it has to be about something else. A few weeks ago, I had a conversation with someone I know who's a fan of lots of dark fiction like Dexter, about how it's kind of interesting that Dexter is asking the question about whether his protagonist might have been different if he wasn't raised to be a killer by his father, and ponders on whether Harry helped him or doomed him to a dark path. However, their immediate response upon me mentioning this is no, he was always a monster. The moment he started torturing small animals is when he was past the point of no return. Harry is a cop, and he recognized this and trained him to only kill criminals so that he wouldn't end up just like every other serial killer. A lot of darker media is not about what is right or wrong, but operates within the conversation. You can use sources from the text to support either argument. Dexter was already killing small animals at the age Harry found out, so it was too late for him, is simply a thought terminator. It grinds the conversation this show is trying to have to a halt by moralizing the actions of an individual that simply does not exist. If we take that conversation further, however, we might talk about things like toxic masculinity, heteronormative family values, the criminal justice system, how trauma changes us, and how we can heal from it or bend to its influence. How do you make room for the darker sides of yourself and reconcile them with the parts of you that love and help and that are good? Is there a point of no return? And if you've crossed it, is it all over? Is trying to be good pointless? While you and I and the vast majority of people watching Dexter are not serial killers, these are problems that a lot of people struggle with in a more abstract sense. You may not have killed someone, but you have almost certainly hurt someone before, and that guilt sits with you even now. Even if Dexter operates under a flawed framework of mental health theory, it brings up the pop psychology term psychopath a lot. I think many of us might find Dexter more relatable than we're comfortable with. A lot of us have had a hard time understanding others and being understood. A lot of us have experienced trauma that changed us for life. A lot of us have fucked up in a way that feels like we can never make up for it. For as many get the bad guy moments as there are in Dexter, those struggles lay at the core of the show and make it stand out as a work of fiction. Once we accept the premise of the show as a story about an affable and oddly relatable vigilante serial killer, we can untether ourselves from the moral framework of our reality and let Dexter ask these questions so fundamental to the human experience. This idea of the vigilante serial killer, in and of itself, ends up as something of a distraction, with the audience tending to focus only on the surface question of whether or not what Dexter does is justified, rather than asking deeper questions about the man himself and what drives him. A similar question, framed in a very similar way, but with the two elements a little more interwoven together, lays at the heart of our next case study. Death Note, while not as grounded as Dexter, could also be thought of as a sort of crime thriller. The original manga was released within the Weekly Shonen Jump in 2003, and a widely popular anime adaptation was serialized in 2006. At first, Death Note poses a simple question to the audience. If you had a notebook in which you could write the name of a person and cause them to die, would you use it? How would you use it? Would you use it for selfish purposes, or would you attempt to use its power altruistically? Can such a power be used altruistically to begin with? The series deeply examines the Japanese criminal justice system and various moral frameworks. It's a classic example of absolute power corrupts absolutely. The main protagonist, Light Yagami, is, for all intents and purposes at the beginning of the series, a normal, innocent person, though with a streak of arrogance. His strong sense of moral justice can likely be attributed to his father, who is chief of the National Police Agency. Light obtains the Death Note early on in the series, and after experimenting with it, begins to use it with the goal of ridding the world of violent criminals. Predictably, this escalates, and Light soon wishes to become the god of a new world that is free from not only crime, but anyone he deems to be a bad and unworthy person. Light's rival, known only as L, faces off to catch and apprehend Light as the mysterious killer that has come to be known as Kira. Despite this, L is willing to put others' lives in mortal peril, and uses illegal and inhumane methods as a means to an end. Moreover, his motivations are not to stop Kira because of some sense of moral fortitude, but because tracking him down is an interesting challenge to him, like none he had ever faced before. His motivations are selfish, as are the motivations of his successors, Mello and Nier. We have to ask ourselves once again, what is Death Note trying to say? Obviously none of us will ever get our hands on something like a Death Note, but we also likely will not be in a position where we as individuals get to decide who lives and who dies. The narration also follows a villain protagonist, a young man who has a naive black and white worldview. Despite being considered highly intelligent, Light's decisions draw him further and further away from the upstanding and promising young person he once was. He dies in a fit of mania, responsible for the death of hundreds, if not thousands, of people. The writer of the series, Sugame Oba, has always been insistent that, although the beliefs of the characters within the manga vary widely, there is no one who is absolutely good or absolutely evil. Ryuk, the spirit of death who gives Light the Death Note, serves as a trickster causing chaos in the mortal world for his own amusement, and critically for the audience, judging the human cast and their eccentricities. He stands above everyone else, morally indifferent, philosophically neutral in the face of different ideas of what constitutes justice. This helps the audience step back and view the flaws in both sides by offering a detached view that simply doesn't care for anyone's idea of justice. By being the most purely amoral character in Death Note, Ryuk places the others in context, allowing viewers to better form their own opinions about the cast without regard for the narrative structure. To Ryuk, there are no heroes and villains, nor is the narrative trying to present anything as traditionally black and white, as a series can often be boiled down to when people only take it at face value. Ultimately, the finality of death and the inability of the Death Note to offer a solution other than death seals the fate of Light's ambitions. He cannot be a god of justice so long as he simply enforces capital punishment on those he's decided it's socially acceptable to kill. While Light starts out with seemingly noble impulses, they quickly fall away from him because when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Light was corrupted by his own desire to do great good, all spiraling from the very first death he caused. From there, he has to continue to kill, to continue to define that first mistake as having actually been the correct decision. What he believes is moral principle is a rigid refusal to correct his initial mistake. He's the ideal Japanese teenager, a prodigy beloved by everyone around him. He can't accept being wrong, and what's worse, can't see the pride that blinds him to his own worst aspects, because every impulse justifies itself for having been the impulse of a supposedly good man. His story provides a way for viewers to reflect on uncompromising moral absolutism, which is more and more relevant both in real-life politics and on emotionally charged social media platforms. Light shows us that dedication to a cause is not enough to ensure one is actually doing good, and that arrogance is easily to mistake for competence. Few of us will ever be in a position like Light was. Still, in him, we can recognize our own tendency towards arrogance and self-justification, and learn something that can help keep us from making the mistakes in the future. But if Light believed he was good, and Dexter wrestled with the question of if he was good or even capable of good throughout the series, that begs the question, what about villain protagonists who just don't care? There are a few games in recent years that are more polarizing than the ongoing horror RPG, The Coffin of Andy and Leyley. It sports an edgy Y2K alternative aesthetic and contains topics such as demon summoning, organ harvesting, patricide, cannibalism, murder, blood and gore, desecration of corpses, on-screen child murder, and, oh yeah, that one thing. So Andrew and Ashley Graves, as individuals, are reprehensible in every sense of the word. Ashley is pure id. She's impulsive, aggressive, and goes after what she wants without any show of restraint. While what she wants in the story is understandable, she wants to be close to her brother Andrew and get payback on the people who not only rejected her but gave her a death sentence, she goes about obtaining these things in ways that are just utterly deplorable. She lies, she kills, she cheats, she even gets violent and throws tantrums. She craves power and love while being denied both her entire life, and she'll do anything to get it. If Ashley is id, then her brother Andrew could be described as ego and repression. Unlike his sister, what he wants in and of itself is what is deplorable. He wants his sister not just as a companion or family member, but intimately. He wants to possess and control her, and he tactfully operates within the world to get that. Andrew, unlike his sister, is cunning. He'll lay low and even let Ashley win a battle if he thinks it will win him the war. We are led to believe near the beginning of the story that Andrew is a doormat for Ashley's abuse. It's even said so in the promotional material. However, even early on, little breadcrumbs are revealed that show us something different. Andrew's frustration towards his sister isn't because he hates her, but because he can't control her. She is an unpredictable force, and this causes them to clash over the course of the game, and in flashbacks throughout their life, even though, arguably, their interests align. Ashley and Andrew can both get what they want if it weren't for Ashley's impatience and impulsiveness, and Andrew's deep sense of shame and insecurity. The people they are in the story are a result of the upbringing they had. As small children, Ashley was convinced she was unlovable and was ready to burn down the world for it, and Andrew believed that he was a terrible, irredeemable person that poisoned everything he touched. And that was before they killed one of their childhood friends. The game having two separate villain protagonists who are inextricably tied up in one another but very easily capable of falling into opposition gives a unique perspective on each. Stuck together in a hellishly toxic, codependent relationship, the relationship between both Andrew and Ashley suffers from an immense amount of friction. Although Ashley appears to outwardly be the worst of the two, this is brought into question repeatedly, not only by Andrew's constant indulgence of her murderous habits, but his own feelings towards her in their relationship. Ashley is not let off the hook either. Being physically and emotionally abusive towards Andrew as well, the two are a pair of very broken people, bound together by isolation, with the both of them terrified to lose each other, even as they make one another miserable. Their love for each other is as genuine as they're capable of loving another person, but their bond is centered around mutual loathing just as much as anything more pleasant. Most of all, neither can imagine life without the other, and that alone is the primary factor responsible for them staying together. Within the Coffin of Andy and Leyley are echoes of the classic gothic horror tale, The Fall of the House of Usher, which also centers around two siblings who are stuck with each other, alone in a decaying house with no one else in their lives. This is appropriate as the game is a stunning example of modern gothic horror. This is a topic I plan to cover in depth in a future video, so make sure to subscribe and leave a comment if you're interested in a more in-depth analysis of the Coffin of Andy and Leyley. The world presented in this game is grim, with few characters who have any traditional appeal as warm, pleasant people. The game is understandably an uncomfortable experience. It's repulsive to most people for its themes, and ignited significant controversy upon release. but its repulsiveness is deliberate and a sincerely thoughtful exploration of abuse and toxic relationships. It is difficult, however, for that to be properly appreciated when people take a reflexive attitude to darker media. The shallow banality of modern media analysis can take multiple forms, whether it be a hateful rejection of anything that portrays content which crosses moral boundaries, or with simplistic interpretations of characters who are presented as bad. This has led to a flattening of complex themes, with critics and creators alike reducing fiction down to what's most easily presentable to a wide audience without them having to think too hard about what they're seeing. This has greatly inhibited the conversations that can be had about not just media, but the human condition. Fiction reflects what we think and what we see in the world. To refuse to see shades of grey, or even for explorations of purely darker morality, such as the case of Andy and Leyley, stifles our emotions and how we can respond to our own feelings, not to mention when we confront those topics in the real world. When we shut down our thinking at the first sign of a character, even a protagonist, being presented as morally impure, we're making it harder to have difficult conversations, not just with others, but internally within ourselves. Artistic repression is unfortunately real, and often in the modern age doesn't even need to be enforced by governments. Communities are often self-policing, just as the infamous Comics Code of Authority for the 1950s was the initiative of publishers to censor their own content with directives like, crimes never be presented in such a way as to create sympathy for the criminal. In every instance, good shall triumph over evil, and the criminal punished for his misdeeds. Sex perversions or any inference to same-sexual attraction is strictly forbidden. There's a wealth of artistic meaning that can be found when we expand our minds enough to think more about complex characters, whether they don't always do the right thing or they always do the wrong thing. The problem is that with complexity comes a greater difficulty to engaging with a work. It requires more processing to work out what's being said, and many find it easier to simplify everything into much more stark terms. It's easier than it should be for audiences to get lost without a tidy moral at the end, ideally delivered by someone the narrative treats as a positive authority figure.
Dear Princess Celestia, I wanted to share my thoughts with you. I didn't learn anything. I was right all along.
There's a dangerous tendency towards preferring to have one's thinking dictated to you rather than having to do any of it yourself. If we can recognize there's more to reality than black and white, we should be able to do the same for fiction. We shouldn't refuse to engage with media that's dark or scary or broaches forbidden topics. On the contrary, these things are necessary for us to continue to evolve as people. With increasing freedom of speech throughout the world has come pushback against terms like obscenity and degeneracy. That fight is important, no matter what words that philosophy is couched in or who's saying them. According to a study by APM Research, half of Americans between 16 and 74 read below a 6th grade level. As illustrated in an excellent short video by Generic Art Dad linked in the description, this indicates many people in the Anglosphere have trouble following along with long-term plot lines and picking up on anything the author hasn't said explicitly, not to mention even more advanced concepts like symbolism and character motivation. Content is created more often for the lowest common denominator, and people used to that content are confused and angered when they encounter a work that does more than that. With media criticism as accessible as it is in this day and age, misguided meta-narratives about art and fiction have spread, resulting in well-intentioned progressives repeating the same conservative outlooks that led to repression in the past and is currently being used even today. When we focus on the deeply flawed idea that fiction is a one-to-one with reality, or there is no worth in examining the actions of someone who's transgressed against the law of morality, we contribute to this regressive idea about what art people are allowed to make and who's allowed to make it. This in turn supports real-life repression in other areas. It's urgent that we stand firm against these reductive readings of media. There's also the personal level to think about. Literacy and education are both tied to a better ability to emotionally regulate. Both practical and emotional skills developed when interacting with art can be applied to information processing about the real world. There's nothing wrong with thinking critically about the things we engage with. It helps us to learn, to grow, and to be human. Big corporations know how to manipulate our emotions, which is less effective if we're already able to critically analyze the world around us. Not only that, but human beings are messy, and sometimes what is a problem faced by many can make us feel like monsters, which means the stories that can speak most to us are the ones about monsters. You may not be a serial killer like the protagonist we examined just now, but haven't you ever had something you felt horrific shame about, and as a result saw yourself reflected in villainous characters? Just as goths rebel by associating with death, despite not actually murdering people, others who find themselves marginalized or outcast for one reason or another can find comfort in healthy identification with fictional depictions of things that are wrong. People who are dealing with unspeakable trauma can also often find a great amount of relief in media about what's haunting them, even when it seems salacious to the average person, and it must be their decision about it if something like that is good for them or not. This idea of serving only simple stories to the lowest common denominator goes hand in hand with telling traumatized and marginalized people to avoid re-traumatizing themselves. In reality, fiction is a healthy place for us to examine feelings, both dark and disturbing, where we can close the book or pause the movie at any time and remove ourselves from the situation. Dark fiction and conversations about dark fiction are a good, proper part of any healthy and functioning society, and have benefited many individuals in different ways, be that at a philosophical or deeply personal and emotional scale. It is a necessary part of who we are and how we process the world around us. When we try to suppress these things, we diminish ourselves in a fundamental part of the human condition. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd like to support the work I do, you can do so for free by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment. You can also donate to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month to get access to my Discord as well as other perks, or make a one-time donation of your choice via Coffee. I'd like to thank my patrons, Paige, Harvey, Hummus, Mohammed, Wee Skilly, Fiona Fox, Boggle, Space Frog, Somnium Astra, Billy Bell, and Zephyr, Vex Fidel, Easy Walker, Swampling Lover, Shira Veed, Garden, Knot, and Daily, and all my imp level patrons as well. Thank you so much, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.